Gretel and Hansel is the first horror film of the new decade for me because I didn't watch The Grudge, and for some reason I still haven't seen Underwater yet, even though I really want to. But this is the 75th adaptation of the 1800s fairy tale, except this time the names are swapped around to let you know that Gretel is the focus of the story, so it's a little bit of a spin on it. And there's going to be spoilers all over this shit. And we're going to break down the events of the film, how I felt about it, how audiences are feeling about it, and its place in the witch horror subgenre. Osgood Perkins, the son of Anthony Perkins, directed this thing, and he came onto the scene with a pretty good horror in 2015, The Black Coat's Daughter, and I really enjoyed it, and I think if you enjoyed Black Coat's Daughter, you will like this movie, but there's a big departure from that in a way you could see it, because that was like made for $5. It was an A24 film, but it was a very small, tiny horror drama, and now this is like sort of a bigger budget fantasy horror with CGI a little bit, but it's a bigger budget, and it's like a recognizable name, you know, it's another Hansel and Gretel movie, but especially when you look at what the last Hansel and Gretel movie was like, this thing, But Osgood Perkins, he still did a great job of making this a smaller, intimate story. It's still mainly these three characters, Hansel, Gretel, and the witch, and it takes place most entirely in this one house. So in the story, Gretel and Hansel, they lose their father, and their mother loses her sanity. So Gretel and Hansel go on the run, and they're looking for food and shelter, and they're starving, you know, they're little kids. And then they come across a house in the wood. It's a very creepy but very beautiful house. I wish you could get like an Airbnb of this house. But inside this home is the witch that they've heard stories of since they were children, the witch that lived in the woods. We thought. At the beginning of the film, we're shown a backstory on how the witch was conceived, and we spend the entire film thinking this witch is that same little girl witch we saw at the beginning of the film, that the enchantress blessed with magic at the start of the story. Not that enchantress, this cool chick with the big triangle. This film follows the original 1800s German fairy tale story pretty well, but it has two significant twists to mix things up. So this enchantress, she rids this little girl of a life-threatening disease that she has, but as we're told over and over again throughout this film, nothing is given without being taken. Every gift has a curse, and the enchantress bestows a dark power onto this little girl, and that makes the little girl go full Omen, Damien, 666 evil, and she murders her father, and she starts murdering people, so she's banished off to the woods. And then when she's banished off to the woods, she starts luring children in there to play with and then ultimately kill. So the little evil demon girl that we saw at the beginning of the film that we thought was this witch grown up the entire film wasn't the case. The witch grown up that we've been watching the whole film that has now lured Hansel and Gretel into her home is the mother of that little girl. The mother killed and ate that little girl and harnessed her powers. So that little girl died very early. She was devoured by her own mother, her mother the child cannibal, and she's the one who's been luring kids into her home and stuffing them up with food and eating them. And at first, Gretel is very worried about this situation. She keeps having these visions that it's something evil is in this house, something is wrong, and Hansel's just like, but we're getting food every day. And I love the moments when like Gretel tries to call out the witch. She's like, how are you getting all this food every day? You know, you're in the middle of the woods. Do you need me to go run for produce or something? And the witch is just like, we got everything we need. We don't need any of that. But I love those little moments where she tries to call her out. And the whole film, I was waiting for the inevitable. I thought she was just the witch is gonna try to kill the kids, and then the kids are gonna rebel and kill her, or they're gonna get eaten, and that was gonna be it. But it has a twist to the story that I found super interesting. This movie reminded me of the episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender where the gang encounters a witch in the woods, and the witch teaches Katara how to bloodbend, if any of you guys know what I'm talking about. That's what this was, because the witch saw that Gretel also had these powers, also had something inside of her. That's why she was having all these visions, all these dream sequences. There were too many dream sequences in the movie, especially like just used for like horror's sake or for jump scare, to have constant dream sequences or whatever. But anyways, the witch starts teaching Gretel how to harness her powers and how to use her powers. And the moment she pulled out a broomstick and started teaching Gretel how to use the broomstick, I fell in love with this movie. Oz Perkins' Gretel and Hansel, it's visually spectacular. It has some of the best cinematography I've seen in a horror movie in so long. The whole film is just gorgeous. The score is beautiful. I love the score. It's just so haunting. It's crazy to think this movie's PG-13 because it's so dark and grim and haunting throughout the whole film. And it's just a truly dark, evil fantasy fairy tale. It is very much a fantasy film. I remember when I saw the trailer, I thought it looked like a copy of 2016's The Witch, but I mean, they're similar in the way that there's a witch in the woods and she has a house and stuff. There can be similarities in a brother and sister, but at the same time, this is very fantasy heavy. It feels like a fairy tale the way it's told. The way Osgood Perkins sets up the house in the beginning, he makes this house feel like a character. He makes you dread this house. The way he does these slow zoom-ins to the window and you just see light coming out of the windows. He did a great job building suspense. And look, while I can rave about it, I didn't love every aspect of this film. I thought the brother who played Hansel, I thought he did a really not great job, but he's a child actor. He looked like he was like 5 or 6 years old, but I don't think he did a good job. And the dialogue of the characters often, especially between the brother and sister, didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like a brother and sister talking and having a conversation. It felt like they were just saying scripted lines to each other, because sometimes when you talk, people don't talk as perfectly as they do in movies a lot of time. You know, a lot of conversations. That's why I love the movie Uncut Gems, because people are talking over each other. They're back and forth. They're like, it doesn't feel like it's so rehearsed. And in this movie, it felt so scripted, the conversations. And my biggest problem with the movie is there was narration by Gretel that went on throughout the entire movie. And I think it was fine in the beginning of the movie, narration to set up the story a bit. But I think it went on way too long, and I think they overdid the narration. I wasn't a huge fan of it. Overall, I still thought that this was a very well done, very evil, tense, suspenseful witch film, and I love witch films, and it's just shot fucking spectacular. It's so fucking beautiful, and the house that the witch was living in was so cool. It was a big triangle with this. It looked gorgeous. The minute the film ended, I thought audiences will hate this movie. Anytime I see a good horror movie, like a horror movie I really like, most of the time I think audiences are going to hate it because they've been trained to love jump scares and, constant screams and frights and stuff like that. It's like they've been trained to see horror as a roller coaster where it's constantly up and down, constant scares, constant thrills. And it seems that regular audiences don't like the slow building, dramatic horror. I looked it up on Rotten Tomatoes, and it has a 12% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which was not shocking, but I'm on the far opposite end on that. What I will say for that is that the all-time greatest witchcraft horror, The Witch, wasn't beloved by audiences either. It got a 58% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is much higher than this movie. And look, I'm not saying Gretel Hansel is up there with The Witch, but it's a solid witch horror. And for the fairy tale fantasy horror lovers, check this movie out. Look, it's not up there with The Witch, but for any witchcraft, witch film horror lover, I really enjoyed this movie. I think it's getting a bad rap by critics and everything. I think that there's more to it, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it's just gorgeous looking. Like, I feel like everyone, no matter what anyone says, if they didn't like the movie, the one thing everyone will agree on is that it's gorgeously shot. And I think it's very suspenseful and very tense, and just, anytime that you throw in witches and broomsticks into a movie, the chances are that I'm gonna like it. But this one I really, really enjoyed. At the end of the film, Gretel burns the witch alive, pinning her to the wall with her broomstick. Hansel goes on, and Gretel takes up the mantle as the new witch. She lives in the house now, and she's going to try to do good. But as we see at the last shot of the film, where her fingertips are turning black, and as we learn throughout the entire film, every gift comes with a curse, and nothing is given without something being taken.